just the sound of the water is enough to make me seriously cold. You know, in the Pacific Northwest, the water comes from glaciers, so even in the middle of summer, it never gets warmer. But anyway, we are here on Swimming Upstream Radio Show. In case I forgot to tell you, I am Dorothy Wilhelm. And today we have the whole idea of the show is to help you find people you wouldn't get to meet on the 6 o'clock news who are doing wonderful things that you'd never hear about otherwise. And I've got a terrific show for you today. We have again Joella Oldfield. This is the third show in our 3-part series. Joella, this means this is the last part of this series. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And
but we have many more ideas for the future.
Oh, yeah. So what are you doing here, Joella?
Well, really, I think we're just kind of summing up our story about Cowboy Fred, the artist, the Western artist, and my daddy. And we kind of want to tell you how he became the person he was and why he painted what he did.
Stop. You have never said his name. Now, who are we talking about and why does he matter?
He does matter. His name is Fred Oldfield, just like an old field. And he was born and raised on the Yakima Indian Reservation in 1918. And back then, everybody either worked on the farm or did something traditional. And Fred kind of staged his own life by doing exactly what he dreamed and what he wanted, which was to become an artist. So he was truly a cowboy who was a painter who became a prominent Western artist.
And he was one of the very few actual cowboy artists. There were a number of artists who painted the West, but the actual working cowboy, Fred was one of a handful. There were maybe 4, possibly 5, no more than that.
It's kind of it truly, and it's interesting. There was a show back in 1984, I think it was, in England, and they wanted real cowboy artists. They ended up with 15 from across the United States who had actually done cowboying and had worked the farms and the ranches and the ranges, and had them all, invited them all to England to show, but they had to be real cowboys.
So now in this series we started by talking about Fred himself and his early paintings. And I just realized we should have gotten those paintings from before, and you'll have to describe them. But what review for us?
Well, we talked about Prisoners of Wounded Knee. It's a tremendous painting. It has a lot of depth and feeling. It's the story of course, the Battle of Wounded Knee and the prisoners being dragged through the snow and the cold and the conditions and how they were caring for one another, the mothers cradling the babies and the grandfathers dying in the snow. It's a very emotional, gut-wrenching painting, but it was very important to Dad to describe the history and where we came from, who was here before us, why these things were important. And he grew up on the reservation. The Indians were his friends. They were his boyhood friends. And so it was very important for him to tell the true story, what really happened in the West. And it was one of his truly most powerful paintings.
And it was his favorite.
And it was his favorite. It was. And I have watched people in our museum stand in front of it and cry. So he did exactly what he wanted to do. He was able to tell the horror of the event while keeping it very human, so that you could relate. You could be that mother or that grandmother and trucking through that snow.
You know what and as I say, I don't know why we didn't think to bring it today, but I'm always struck by the realism of the actual people. You know, they're not glamorized like a Hollywood
production. Oh no, he often, people talked about his paintings and how he told a story with every painting. Occasionally he would just paint a horse, but that happened very seldom. And he would paint just scenics because he loved the outdoors. There's no doubt about it. But when he told a story, it was very important to him to be accurate. He'd have old timers. To him, they were old timers. He was 80 and they were 90 something at the time. And they'd come up and they'd say, well, Sonny, you got that saddle right, or the rope on the horse right, or they would have never, I looked at that painting over there and I could tell that artist has never been on a horse. So it was real important for Fred to get the details, but also the feel. And a lot of his cowboys that he portrayed, as you well know, Dorothy, that they would be slouched in the saddle, their shoulders would be
Yeah.
dipped, they'd be tired, they'd be dirty and dusty. And so you're right, he didn't do rhinestone cowboys.
Yeah, right. And it's amazing for a person as social and sociable as he was. He really didn't care what anybody else thought of it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. He did not. He truly painted the stories that were in his heart. And even the last 2 days when he was alive, he was very funny. And he was in the hospital and he says, Josie, if I get out of here this time, I've got a whole new bunch of meanings in my head. He still had stories to tell, wonderful. He loved history. He read everything he could get his hands on about our American history, and it was important for him. He loved it.
Well, we wanted to say in this third and final episode of our series to show a little bit of how Fred went out into the world and how the world welcomed him with open arms.
You and I have often talked about the fact that part of Fred's success was Fred. He was so charismatic and he just had that it quality, but it was because he chose to live his life every day with joy and community. So that's, as you were just saying, maybe we can bring up the photo of him as a little boy. Fred had nothing but fun as a kid, and he's off to the far right. You can see the little toe-headed crew cut there. These were his cousins and brothers and his sister. And these children were who he was raised with, always from one house to the other. And they weren't houses like you and I know them. They were very, very crude structures. And Daddy said it was the time of his life. They were all terribly poor. It was in the midst of the Depression. And yet he said they were all poor. So nobody knew any difference. It was fabulous.
The one thing that I'm struck with looking at the kids is that because I grew up in their tar paper shacks is what they were. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, notice that they're all wearing, clean white shirts and dungarees. Poor wasn't an excuse for not being proud. That I think they showed their pride in the way they dressed.
They did. And he carried that with him his whole life. He was always, in his later years, save from later 50 on, Daddy went back to his roots and he dressed as a cowboy. His whole attire was a Western attire. But it was very important to him. It didn't have to be, he didn't even know what Nordstrom's was, trust me. But it had to be a clean pressed Western shirt. And he took a shower every morning like clockwork. And those jeans better be clean and not pressed, but, not just wadded up either. It was very important to him.
Well, yeah, and it's how we grew up. What else? What other pictures did you bring us? I
brought a picture. Here he goes a few years later when he's married to my mama. And I actually think that little tiny tummy on her was me. I have to tell you, it's kind of exciting. But they were living at Fort Lewis at the time. Daddy was just getting it was right at the end of World War II. And this, again, shows you that, there they were, just as cute as can be, just as ordinary as can be. And he always brought the realism to his paintings, but he wanted to talk about friendships, family, children, the things that were important to Fred. So here he is starting out brand new. And at this time, he was probably attending art school or applying to attend art school because he was leaving the military. And he moved back to Seattle to do that from Toppenish.
And, notice your mom's hairdo. She's wrapped up in a scarf.
Wrapped in a bandana, absolutely. And there's several pictures through the years like that.
Well, but that's what women all did in those days. Rosie the Riveter. Mm-hmm. This was the attire of the women working in the airplane factories and all that. So even if we didn't have a factory to call our own, we still did our hair that way.
Exactly. And you can see Daddy had hair. So he always loved this photo because I don't ever remember my daddy with hair. He lost all his hair very young. So
Me either.
I know you've known him forever also. And
Oh
there
yeah,
you are.
there I am. And see,
And one of the reasons I brought this photo is because Fred had friends that were from his time on the reservation. The Indians remained his friends throughout his lifetime. He had kids that he picked, potatoes with that were his friends. And he also had friends that were very prominent, as here he is with Dorothy Wilhelm, who has always been a personality known wherever she went and whatever door she walked through. It made no difference to Daddy. Had he not liked Dorothy, trust me, they would not be here laughing together.
that's really true. I know
It
that.
is. There was not a phony bone in his body, but if he liked you, he didn't care who you were or what your status was. You were his friend and you would be there forever.
That is so true because I'm just thinking he was one of the rare people, especially being in media. You go someplace and you're to interview somebody or something, and you might think, oh, I wonder what mood he'll be in today or whatever. And that just wasn't the case. But Fred was always Fred.
He truly was. And he just, it always surprised people that he not only would remember them from 40 years ago, he'd remember their wife and the dog's name. I mean, we were just laughing about that yesterday, one of the other artists and I, that he could remember George Montgomery. He was, a very famous movie star, married to Dinah Shore. And he loved my dad. And matter of fact, Dad was the last person he called before he passed, the night before he died. They stayed friends through an entire lifetime because Daddy wasn't impressed by George as a movie star. Daddy loved George as a man, and George knew that. You could feel that. And they traveled quite a bit together. Stuart Anderson, another one. He actually talked to Dad 2 days before he passed away. Their friendship remained tight to the bitter end. And it was Dad that they reached out to at the end because, again, the friendship was real. It wasn't based on the fact that Stuart Anderson was famous all over the States or that George was a movie star or that Dorothy was so prominent. Here he is.
Well, I was going to say Stuart Anderson, for those who eat, was the founder of the Black Angus chains of restaurants. And after he stepped away and passed away, it really went all to hell, I mean,
it did. They were never the same. So this is a fun, quick story about Daddy's personality. George Montgomery is on the right in the white jacket, and he was hosting a big fundraiser in Arizona, or Palm Desert. I'm sorry, I think it was Palm Desert, raising money for the Zane Grey Society. And the room was filled with old actors. And here comes Jack Palance, which is, the tall gentleman on the left. And Daddy's short and cute. And so Jack was making his way through the room chatting, and he and George were old friends, of course, from their movie days. And he had just released the movie City Slickers. And Dad went to maybe 3 movies in his life, and City Slickers happened to be one of them. So he was kind of tickled that he got to meet Jack because he thought he would be a fun personality. So he walks up to him, and Daddy, of course, being just kind of on the fun side of pushing the limits, looked at him and he said, well, it's nice to meet you, Jack. Just curious, you killed anybody today? Jack looked at my dad and he says, no, but I sure as hell been looking at you. So they hit it off right from the beginning because it wasn't about, oh, wow, I get to meet Jack Palance. It was, Jack, you did a great job in that movie. Let's talk about it. It was kind of like, let's share our talent, not I get to shake hands with a famous movie star. So, and this, again, this is what I'm making the comparison. All of these are fellow artists. They were not famous. They were not nationally known at the time. They were on a trail ride. They were out there for over a week in the woods, sleeping on the ground. Daddy was their fry cook. They rode horses everywhere they went. And it was one of the best times of his life, just having that time. Every day they took time out to paint, and they would set up along a creek or here on the campsite. And It was a beautiful time, but he was with these people because they had this creative bond, not because of who they were. And then his greatest love of his life were children and teaching the kids. And here he is with one of his favorite students. We watched Cameron from the time he was, half the size he is in this photo until he graduated from high school. And he came back to visit Fred long after he was in college. But he had so much talent, did not go on to be an artist, but went on to be a very accomplished musician. So that creative gene just flowed through him. And Dorothy's going to talk a little bit in a minute about Dad's recipe for life. One of the things that was so important to Dad was to keep learning about whatever it might be. In the background, you see him on a horse. This was on his, I believe, 90th birthday, right at his 90th birthday. In this photograph, he's up on the stage with one of our very prominent disc jockeys, Ichabod Kane, and a beautiful little girl who was one of our art students, but also a dance student. And Daddy's secret passion had always been to learn how to tap dance. So for his 95th birthday gala, we invited her to get Fred up on the stage and teach him how to tap dance. Yeah. So at 95, there he is trying to learn a little, I'm not even sure how to do it. I don't tap dance.
How did he do?
They all clapped and everybody laughed. But to him, it was kind of a thrill. And the most thrilling part was this darling little girl up there saying, "No, Cowboy Fred, left, left, stomp, stomp, stomp," that kind of thing. So it was a darling episode in the party. And again, here he is. You can just feel his excitement about teaching these kids about how the water flows or the shadow. So it makes it look like the waterfall's actually coming down over those rocks, and how it pools up at the bottom, and how you can do that with light and dark and the brush strokes. And these are just young children. The one in the background who looks like a darling little boy happens to be my beautiful granddaughter. But he thrived on the children. He truly did. And teaching to him was just as good as it gets.
Well, we talked about, and let's see, is that those are the pictures, and they were lovely. Those were great. And we talked about the fact that just for fun, we created a recipe that we thought Fred would have approved of how to live a full life. And you may have some additional thoughts, but we thought that Fred would say, now remember, he wasn't here to defend himself, but we thought that he'd start with a heaping cup of community, which you've harvested yourself. I think he didn't much believe in going online and finding people.
No, he did not. He did not. And a perfect example of that part of the recipe, Dorothy, is that after my mother passed and he was living in Tacoma, well, even before that, he went to breakfast every single day because that was his start of a day in community. And he made friends that he would have never had an opportunity to meet. People would come to breakfast at certain restaurants because they knew Fred would be there.
Yeah, they knew that, and they would come. I've seen that myself. Now, so adding to that, 3 tablespoons of old friends whom you've made yourself, and 2 tablespoons of younger friends who will move boxes and do errands for you.
It was extremely important to Dad. He would always say to me, I love those old guys, but they're starting to get pretty boring. All they talk about is their meds and their operations. And he says, Josie, you got to keep getting younger friends. 1, you need them. And 2, they're going to keep you young and excited. And he said, it's about truly never thinking you have enough friends. I have my best friend, Dorothy. That's too small of a life, and he was all about the big picture, the huge community.
Now it says, try something new every day, volunteer, take dancing lessons, look for ways to build community.
Absolutely. I loved it when you sent me the recipe because I thought, that is so, it's just like those were the talking points of Fred. And he never ever. I could call him at 9 o'clock at night and say, how's your day been, Daddy? And he'd say, oh, it's great, honey, but I'm not ready to go to bed yet. And I'd say, well, Dad, are you sure? No, he'd say, I haven't figured out what I'm going to do tomorrow. And he would never go to bed without a plan for tomorrow, whether it was to finish a painting or to start a new painting or to go to breakfast. But he had to have a reason to get out of bed and something exciting to make him just to get on with it. And it didn't matter what hurt or what ached. It was something exciting ahead for him. And he truly...
Yeah, there's one thing more, though, I think that for those of us who knew him for a long time, was that when your mama got to be very ill, and we've always known that that was probably what kept Fred from being the top cowboy artist in the country, because he would not leave her side at all. He was with her the whole time. But because he loved his friends so much, he would actually call us a group. I mean, I said different group, not all the time, call us up. And we would talk a little, and then he'd say, well, he said, here, I have to go, I have to go do something for a minute. Just stay right here. And we'd stay right there. And pretty soon he'd come back. But he was absolutely reluctant. And I thought how smart that was, because he had everybody he loved, right? Right there.
He did, Dorothy. And friends like you were friends for years. For those of you that don't know their history, I mean, they were friends for more years than most of us ever get the opportunity. And it was because of that, Dorothy. It was a two-way street. You were willing to stay on hold.
Yeah.
You knew that Dad needed that human connection. My mama was very ill. She was bedridden with MS. And he needed somebody that he could get excited with about a new painting with. And he could talk to you about what you were doing, what new TV show you had, and what you were, working on. And you would ask him about his paintings. And so it kept him involved in the outside world while his got smaller. And he continued to do that for other people as their worlds got smaller. When my mom was gone, Daddy had I won't call it a hit list, but a list that he would say, haven't talked to Dorothy, I better check on her. Or old Charlie's alone now, I need to check on him.
Yeah. Well, listen, my dear, now that you're kind of at a between place, though, with the Western Heritage Center, folks want to find you and hear more and see more. Where are you and how did they do that?
Well, this is our exciting news. We are in a temporary location that we're now calling the schoolhouse. So as I said earlier, everything to Dad was about the kids. So when we knew, we were at the Puyallup Fairgrounds for 22 years, and they're going through a huge reconstruction and the roads were torn up, and it was just time we had to leave. We didn't have access to our building. So we thought, what are we going to do? Finding a building big enough for a museum and an art school was going to be a job. But if we stopped our art classes, that would be giving up Fred's dream. So we found a big, beautiful old Victorian house around the corner from the fair, just a couple blocks away, right there in the little town of Puyallup. It's a beautiful city. And we closed our doors on a Friday night at the fairgrounds, and on Tuesday morning, the children showed up for art classes in the new house. So it's big enough to hang a few of Fred's paintings, but in the museum, we have over 100 of his paintings. And in the museum, we have literally a couple hundred gorgeous native baskets and artifacts. Those right now are all in storage. So we have the schoolhouse going, and we're still on our search for a big building or a big barn. And I'm kind of excited about the barn idea, having classrooms upstairs, being able to build a second floor, and then using the first floor for all the museum and artifacts and events and art events. So we're kind of in transition, but I just know there's someone out there who's got a barn they're going to share with us, or one they like to have mucked out and something done with. So
that's great. If they've got that barn and they want to get in touch with you, how would they find you?
FredOldfieldCenter.org. We're online, or really, truly, if you just type in Fred Oldfield or Fred Oldfield Center, you'll find our website. It comes right up. So we would love to hear from any and all of you. And we're taking all ideas. I have seen so many pieces of property and truck through the mud on some of them. And, you know, we have a lot of vision. I work with hundreds of people like Dorothy. So I have a wonderful community myself of visionaries, and we're working on it.
You know, I was just thinking, if you were at the Western Heritage Center 22 years, we've been working together for 40 years.
Yes, we have.
Well, we must be going to get somewhere any minute.
Well, you know, what a gift that is, actually. Not everybody gets to say their friendships last that long.
That's really true. Well, if people would like to hear this again, I can't see why they wouldn't. Or if they have a friend they'd like to share it with, you can go to itsnevertoolate.com. If you would like to have a copy of Fred Oldfield's Recipe for a Full Life, write to me, Dorothy, at itsnevertoolate.com, and I'll send it to you, along with the story I wrote about Fred's lying down on the hot coals to keep warm on a winter night. Okay, Joella, thanks so much, as always. Wonderful.
We'll see you soon, dear.
You bet. And I hope to see all of you soon, and let's get something done. We've sat around long enough today. See you next month.